Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Soccer Sofa, hosted by myself, the Stud.
And me, the Horse.
This week we've got a fantastic interview with one of the founding members of the class of '92. Unfortunately, due to injury, this founding member didn't graduate. Despite that, he did go on and have a very successful career, playing 200 games across numerous different leagues. And it's not every single day that you can get compared to George Best. Ladies and gentlemen, roll VT!
Super ball, here's Ben Thornley. Looking up for support, might go alone, does go alone, super finish. Thornley, Giggs, McKee, lovely goal, and that will be that. Surely now the Youth Cup belongs to Manchester United.
This week we've got a fantastic interview. Ben Thornley, how you doing, Ben?
I'm very well, thanks, guys. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me on.
No problems at all. How's lockdown treated you?
Well, I suppose pretty much the same as everybody else, really. It was great to think that you had so much time to do a lot of the things that you probably would have done, or I would have done in the summer. But then, obviously, for the reasons why we were in lockdown, it suddenly became apparent that it was testing times for everybody, and I'm just grateful that the football season, whether you agreed with it coming back or not, has come back on and enabled me to get back to some sort of normality. So yeah, I know there are people that are still not back at work, but I am, and I'm grateful. It's just a shame that along the way we've lost so many lives, and this has just been just an unprecedented time for everybody.
Precedented indeed, but we're thankful during this time because it gives us opportunities to have chats with people like yourself. So thank you very, very much for joining us on the Soccer Sofa.
No problem at all.
A great place to start, Ben, would be your childhood. So what were you like as a kid?
Well, most people will tell you I'm a nuisance, the same as I am now. So I was just a normal kid. I grew up with a brother and sister, mum and dad as well. Became interested in football when I watched the 1982 World Cup and I saw Brian Robson score that brilliant goal against France after 27 seconds. And that was just something that I wanted to do. You know, when I saw him do that, I didn't have anything else in my mind but wanted to play football. But of course, at that age, I was 7 years old back in 1982. And you never think to yourself that you're going to be able to do what he's done and play for Manchester United. I know he was the captain and he was my hero for a long, long time. But you know what? I was talking 9 years later when I turned 16 and I started out at the club. I was walking through the same doors as he was at the Cliff training ground. And for somebody like myself, growing up in Manchester and not too far away from Manchester United and watching him play for all the way through the 80s to suddenly be in the same room as him and from time to time the same training pitch and then the same playing surface. It was a real, I know it's a cliche, but it was a dream for me. So that was how I got myself involved in football from 7 years of age, and then sort of progressed through how everybody else would normally do into your school team, into your Sunday team, into being lucky enough to get selected for your town team, which, like Ryan Giggs, was Salford Boys. Then I captained my county. I played for England at under 15 level. So it was just a natural progression, and you still don't ever believe that you're going to be able to step out in the theatre of dreams and play a competitive game for Manchester United. So yeah, it was a steady rise, but it was a progressive one, and I was very, very well, certainly one of the fortunate ones.
And you touched on it there. You were obviously brought up in Salford, and I think did you go to school in Salford as well?
I did, yeah. I went to school in Salford all my life, yeah.
And were you a hard worker at school?
I wasn't too bad. I realised that there was something, i.e. football, that there was especially at that time, that I excelled at. But my dad was a head teacher, so he always, as much as him and my mum, always supported me with my football, whichever team I was playing for, whichever training session I had to go to. He always made it a case in point of saying, don't just neglect your education. It's important So I did okay at school. Probably not as well as some, but certainly better than others. So I wanted to make sure that I at least had something behind me before I went off and started at Old Trafford in '91.
It seems a bit of a surprise based on, well, I'm guessing first of all you were a Man United fan growing up.
What, because I don't live in London?
No, no.
Which incidentally I do now.
No, I meant what I was leading on to was you joined Man City to start with, yet I'm guessing you were attending Man United games as a kid and being Salford based. So how did you end up at Man City to start with in their academy?
I only sporadically went to home matches even whilst I was at Manchester City when I was growing up. I think I went to my first game in 1984, so I would have been 9 years old with a school friend of mine at the time who had a spare ticket and took me along. I ended up at Manchester City because I was playing for my Sunday team, and of course you get a lot of scouts playing, coming to watch Sunday league games, and especially when you're a decent player, because you tend to get more people coming to watch the team that you're playing, and that also enabled other lads to go to, for people to see them and for them to perhaps get picked up by an academy, and not necessarily United or City, but you've got your Wigans, your Oldhams, your Rochdales, your Boltons, there's a lot of teams in and around the Greater Manchester area. It's just that people tend to focus on the bigger ones like United and City. But I got asked to go down and just join the School of Excellence there at their old training ground, Platt Lane, just round the corner from the stadium. And I went down there on a Thursday night with another lad that played in the same Sunday team as me, and whose father was very good and took us both down there. So that was how I ended up at City's academy. I played games for them at under sort of 13, 14 level before I made the move over to Manchester United.
And I think I'm right in saying it was Brian Kidd who scouted you, effectively playing for Salford Boys. Is that correct?
I think it probably was, yeah. They had so many scouts, but I think Brian Kidd, with him being obviously a local lad himself who's done everything in the game, playing for Manchester United, scoring a goal in a European Cup final as a teenager. He'd also played for City as well, which everybody knew. But yeah, it was Brian Kidd. He took a real vested interest in the local lads, and then of course he was progressed up to be the first team coach at Manchester United. But he always had an affection for the local lads, the likes of Gary Neville and Scholesy and Nicky Butt, and especially the latter two, because they were from the same sort of area as he was from as well. So yeah, I one Friday night I got a knock on the door when my parents had said I couldn't go out that evening to a friend's house that we always took it in turns to stay. And I opened the front door, which nobody ever used in my house. It was always it was such a familiar household. Everybody used to come round the back, knock on the door, not wait for an answer, and just come straight in. It was like that sort of a household. So for people to come to the front door, we knew it wasn't somebody that we knew well. Little did I know that it was Brian Kidd and Sir Alex Ferguson, who I would get to know very well over a period of sort of 8 or 9 years. And that for me was completely surreal, to see the manager of Manchester United and Brian Kidd standing on your front doorstep.
So did you invite them in and offer them a cup of tea and sort of discuss what was going to happen with your career?
Well, my mum and dad obviously knew about it, so I don't think I was going to turn around and say no thanks and mistaking them for Jehovah's Witnesses or something like that. I was completely gobsmacked, and obviously my mum and dad knew, and they were over my shoulder, and straight away they obviously invited him in, and my mum had done a load more food than normal, which I was still finding a bit strange. And yeah, they came and I sat in with them for a certain period of time. Then I left the room while they discussed the more sort of intimate details of what they were going to do with me, and just so that they could get the gist of what it all entailed, because it was completely new to them as well. So to have the main guy in Sir Alex Ferguson and Brian Kidd, who my dad obviously knew from being a United supporter, sitting in front of them and explaining to them that they were, really wanted me to sign for United, and I came back in at the end. Everything was done and dusted. There were no papers signed. I didn't want to sign schoolboy forms as a lot of lads did. I just wanted to sort of leave the door open, because it swings both ways. If they thought I was still good enough when I was 16, then I would sign for Manchester United. And similarly, it gave us both the option when I reached 16, because I was only 14 at the time, that if we both still wanted to go in that direction, then it was like a gentleman's agreement that that's what we would do, and so it happened, and so it began.
And you then joined, am I correct in saying at that time Eric Harrison was involved with the youth, and he was the manager of the youth teams there at Man
That's
United?
right, yeah. Eric had been there for a number of years. He'd come over from Everton, and he was the guy that we were going to be spending our first couple of years with. Absolutely fantastic bloke. I think anybody that you would ever speak to from my era, they've always got just the fondest memories of Eric. He was a tough guy. That him and Sir Alex Ferguson, in a lot of ways, were cut from the same cloth. They were very old school. They demanded high standards. They demanded hard work, and they wanted to make sure that you went back to your parents at the end of the day exactly the same lad as you went out in the morning, and that was imperative to them. But he was a wonderful coach. I learned a hell of a lot from him, as all the others did. And as I've just said, if you spoke to Gary Neville, Chris Casper, John O'Kane, Nicky Butt, Paul Scholes, David Beckham, Ryan Giggs, they would all have, even going back as far as people like Norman Whiteside, Eric was there then, and they owe what they did in their careers, certainly to start with. A giant stepping stone was Eric Harrison.
And am I correct in saying Eric Harrison had a little phrase to let you know when you'd made it as a footballer?
He certainly did. He certainly did. It wasn't very often when we came in and we knew that we were going to get a rollicking. There were times when you thought you were going to get one and you didn't, and there were other times, like I'll take you for an instance. We were playing in the A team, and we were only 17 at the time, and the B team was for sort of 16, 17-year-olds. The A team was for people that were not quite getting in the reserves, and they were sort of late teens. But they saw something in quite a lot of us to pitch us into the A team in our first year. And myself and Nicky Butt, we were low on players actually. And myself and Nicky Butt, obviously Nicky being a central midfielder, me being a wide player on either side, predominantly the left, we played centre forward. And we came in at half time and we were 5-0 up. And Nicky had scored a hat-trick, I'd scored 2, and 2 of Nicky's goals I'd actually set up for him. And we thought, well, this is an absolute breeze. The second half's going to be a doddle. Well, me and Nicky went out like gibbering wrecks in the second half, because he came in at half time and he said to us, "You two up front, the lights are on, but there's nobody at home." and he'd scored a hat-trick and I'd scored 2, and we thought we just come in really strange positions and done exactly what we were supposed to do, and that's score goals. And Eric just had this thing where you were never quite off the hook. But his most famous phrase, which is one that you were alluding to, was the one where he would come in and he'd say, "I'm telling you now, you are not fucking good players until I tell you you are." And that was the real sort of, we haven't done anything in the game yet. We're not, we might never do. And obviously in my case, with Manchester United, that happened for whatever reason or another, that happened. But he just wanted to make sure that we kept our feet on the ground. We never got carried away. And I'm pretty sure that it wasn't too long before he was telling all those players just how good they were.
Superb. And that's what I was going to allude to as well, the grounding. Because at that time as well, because you're apprentices, reserves, whatever the phrase is, you guys were also doing a lot of jobs around the ground. So I'm just going to read a quote here. "You can't understand someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes." Am I correct in saying you used to walk miles in Brian Robson's shoes to break them in for them?
Yeah, that's very true. Going back to what I said first and foremost, when we first came on, I was walking up the stairs in the cliff, probably about a week into our pre-season training, and it was just probably about the time then that the trainers were still out, but we were slowly being introduced to being able to play some football and get our boots on. And Brian Robson was walking down the stairs with like stacks and stacks of boxes that you could barely see over the top of his New Balance boots. And he asked me how it was going and was I enjoying it, how I was finding everything. And, through sort of goggly eyes, I'm like, yeah, everything's great. And he said, what size are you? And we just happened to be the same size footwear. And he gave me a pair of these New Balance boots and said, would you do me a favour and wear these for pre-season? If you want to take them, because we had a trip at the end of July to the Milk Cup in Northern Ireland, which we won. And he said, if you want to take them there, then you're more than welcome. But after 2 weeks, I thought, that's a bit cheeky, that. So I went to give him back, as much as I'd have loved to have taken him up on his offer. I went to give him back and he said, how are they? I said, yeah, they're fine. I didn't get any blisters. I was really, over the moon with the boots. And he said, if you like them, then they're yours. So I did end up taking them to the Milk Cup and scoring some decent goals in them and helping the lads win the tournament as well. And I've still got them to this day because it's something that when somebody does that to you and somebody that you've been following for such a long time, you just never think that moments like that are gonna happen. So I want to make sure that I preserve it.
And am I correct in saying the Milk Cup, from what I remember, was it in Northern Ireland? And as an Evertonian, you gave Liverpool a tonkin, I think.
We did. We beat. I think we beat Liverpool 4-1 in the quarter-final with my mate, and fittingly from not far from where we played the game, Keith Gillespie scored a hat-trick in that game. So yeah, we overcame some very good sides, but that was a particularly nice memory of beating them and beating them convincingly as well.
And you're really starting to build a career for yourself here and build a bit of a name, because I think it was off the back of that tournament. Nobby Stiles referred to you as good as George Best. Is that the correct statement?
That's
a big accolade to have.
First and foremost, that's not true. That happened. But what he did say was in one of the group games in that tournament, ironically against Hearts, who we went on and beat in the final to win the tournament. I scored a goal that I think, with Nobby's obviously brilliant memories of a wonderful player in George Best, he saw a goal that was reminiscent of goals that he used to score week in, week out. And I did have a particularly good tournament, and I think that goal is something that really stuck in his mind. And at a dinner a number of days later, that he was at a table with a friend's father of mine who was very close to some of the ex-players. When he was asked, Nobby, who he thought was coming through and who people need to look out for, on the back of me scoring that goal, I know that his comment was that Ben Thornley is the closest thing I've seen to George Best coming through the club. Now, obviously, we know that is a remark that probably, if he would have enhanced upon it, I wouldn't have come anywhere close. But I think it was just that goal that was reminiscent of goals that George Best used to score for fun, and that is probably why he said it. It's the only thing I can deduce the way he would say it, because to be compared to somebody like him is something that nobody would ever believe. But because it came from a European Cup winner, from a World Cup winner, then it just gives it that little bit more credibility, as embarrassing as it might be now.
Well, don't you be claiming that's embarrassing. I bet you've got that in a motif above your bed.
I would.
No, I haven't, but it was nice that somebody of the ilk of Nobby Stiles, who I know he's obviously not a well man at the moment, struggling with dementia, and losing Eric Harrison last year, and obviously Nobby not in a good way either. Then, as much as it's great to sit and have a laugh about it, then I also must add that it's very, very sad that obviously one of them is no longer with us, and basically in normal everyday life, Nobby Stiles mentally isn't either, and that makes me extremely sad. Yeah,
it's sad times. Eric Harrison was a big loss. And obviously, we wish Nobby well. Going back to that squad or the class of 92, I mean, your book's out, and you say that you famously didn't graduate, but I just want to go through. Sorry, I'm just going to read some of the names here, because you've got the Milk Cup there, you've got the FA Cup, Youth Cup, sorry, in 92. But I just want to read through this because we all know David Beckham, Nicky Butt, Simon Davis, Gig, Robbie Savage, Keith Gillespie, because they all went on to huge careers. But then there's people like John O'Kane, came to Everton, had a very, very successful career. But one player out of all of that people think is a massive part of that class of 92 was Scholesy. Because Scholesy is obviously unbelievable. But am I correct in saying he didn't actually play in any of that cup run, did he?
No, he didn't, and it is really strange because immediately anybody mentions Paul Scholes, you know what a wonderful player, the best player for me that the Premier League has ever seen, and certainly one of the best players, midfielders to grace the pitch in the world of football in the last 15, 20 years. So it probably raises a few eyebrows when you hear that out of all the class of 92, Scholesy wasn't even involved, and he wasn't in the first year. He was, by his own admission, he wasn't up to the physical stature of the rest of the lads that were playing throughout that cup run. But the transition from Paul Scholes, from leaving the club in May of 1992 after we'd won the Youth Cup, to coming back in the July and starting our second years as apprentices, was just phenomenal. He was just a transformed character. He'd obviously gone away. He'd realised that he had a bit of catching up to do, and he did it. Whatever he did in those 6 to 8 weeks before the season started again, or before we came back for pre-season, he was just a transformed character, and he was the leading light in our second run to the final, when we were soundly beaten by a very, very good and physical Leeds United side. But up until that point, I mean, Scholesy was just for the whole of that season, and then from then on in, he just went from strength to strength. We all made our debuts. Scholesy scored 2 on his debut at Port Vale in the whatever the equivalent was back then of the now Carabao Cup, and he turned himself into one of the most coveted footballers that the world has seen in these last 20 years. But no, Scholesy didn't play a single minute of our FA Youth Cup run in the 91-92 season.
What do you think made yourself and the other players in that 91-92 season so cohesive, so synergetic? What made the difference? Because we're never going to see this again. We're never going to see so many players of so much talent go on to achieve so much.
No, it's very, very, I mean, we're using the word unprecedented because of the times that we're living in the moment, but that is something else. I mean, the current crop of youngsters that United have got at the moment, we're already seeing what Mason Greenwood can deliver. We've seen Brandon Williams, other lads that have got games under the belt like James Garner, Dylan Levitt, Ethan Laird, Ted Mengi has made his, and he's still the captain of the youth team. Mason Greenwood can also still play for the youth team, by the way, and if that does resume, then we play ironically a semi-final against Chelsea as we're going to do on Sunday. But I think that we got on really well off the pitch. We'd all got together for years and years prior to that. Obviously, a lot of us played against each other week in, week out, the lads that were local. We all came together on one night a week to do evening training. We were slowly introduced, even when we were still at school, to playing games in the B team on a Saturday morning. We just, all of us seemed to get on really, really well. And, of course, it helped that the lads that I entered the fray with were very talented footballers that just listened and that were prepared to work at things that they were good at and things that they weren't. And Gary Neville is a great sort of exponent of that he knew that there were things that in the skill level he wasn't any good at. But because of the position that he wanted to play in, which was a centre-half, I know he ended up playing a lot of his career at full-back, but when I was growing up playing with and against him, he was a midfielder, and then he converted himself to a centre half, which is where he played for the youth team. And he worked and worked and worked. And by his own admission, he said, I wasn't as talented as the other lads. But what he did was he worked extremely hard. He dedicated himself to making sure that he was the best that he possibly could be. And it worked. David was another one. Obviously, he had more talent with the on show from an early age. But very often you would see him outside taking free kicks round walls, you know, just whacking the ball off the wall of the cliff, practicing his passing. Everybody had different things that they were good at, and we all worked collectively to make ourselves better players. And whether that was on our own or whether that was under the guidance of Eric with actual training, it was just a pleasure to be around. And these lads, despite what happened to me, were always going to be, you know, top level players. And so it turned out to be.
And was there a lot of competition between you all?
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, you did have competition and you didn't want to lose your place. But I think that we tried to get ourselves to levels where we were all trying to, you know, reach as high as we possibly could. So there was obviously competitiveness in the training. But because, and you ask anybody today that will train with Manchester United, it's okay asking about the players that you come up against and how difficult they are. But when you're training day in, day out with really, really good players, you only make yourselves better. And of course, football's a team game. It's not an individual sport. Yes, there are bits of individual brilliance that everybody will remember, but at the end of the day, it is a team sport. And if Gary Neville and Nicky Butt and Paul Scholes and David Beckham and myself and Keith Gillespie and Ryan Giggs can all be playing at the top of the game, then that can only be for the good of the team.
No, I completely agree with that. But sorry, I meant competition because Giggsy said your clobber was a fashion disaster, and Beckham said that he could outpull you when you went out on the ale.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, Beck's with now, there's no question about it. I think at the time, there was a little bit of competition where that was concerned, no question. It was always a good topic of conversation for a Monday morning when we came back in, if we'd managed to, you know, sort of endear ourselves to the opposite sex, as it were, on a Saturday night. But other than that, I can't disagree with Giggsy. Yeah, my fashion sense left a lot to be desired. And still does, by the way. If you speak to my missus, she'll say exactly the same.
Fair play.
So you let me go through all that and you were just taking a mickey. Brilliant.
Never. It's just lightheartedness. It's just impressed. How often can someone say they went on the pull with David Beckham?
Yeah, on more than one occasion, no question. Yeah, it was. We were quite inseparable. Myself, him, Gary Neville, Chris Casper. We when we were old enough and we could do it, we went out into Manchester and we went to Malta together, which was something we did from a very early age. Got a great affiliation with the Maltese supporters and their brilliant supporters club that they've got there that turned 60 years old last year. So yeah, we did a hell of a lot of things together, but inevitably as football moves on and it gets a little bit more serious, and obviously players like myself, you know, we have to make decisions to leave a club like Manchester United. You've already mentioned John O'Kane. He had to do the same. Chris Casper did the same. And a little bit further down the line, Phil Neville left, Nicky Butt left. And you're only left, obviously Beck's left, very high profile. And you're only left with Giggsy, Scholesy and Gary that continued to play for the same club for the whole career, which is, you know, quite phenomenal, really, when you think about the competition and certainly with Giggsy and how late he played for Manchester United. And after, 33, 34, completely reinvented himself. Amazing what he managed to achieve, as it was for what Sir Alex managed to achieve in his tenure.
And then, so we're moving closer to 1994 when your first team debut came. What was the build up to that like?
I was training as I normally would with the reserves. I can remember coming into the cliff and they had a foyer there, and Brian Kidd came downstairs to me on Thursday morning before we went out to training, and he said to me, "You train with Jimmy Ryan, who was our youth reserve team manager at the time. Train with Jimmy today, but tomorrow you'll come in you'll train with us, and then you'll bring your club suit straight to Old Trafford after we finish training, and you're on the coach down to West Ham to stay over on the Friday night. And back then, a little bit differently later on, but back then there were only 3 subs, and one of them was a goalkeeper. So you knew that there was a really, really good chance, if things were going reasonably well, that this might be the day when you make your debut. And so it was. I came on for Dennis Irwin sort of with about 20 minutes to go, and just, you know, what an incredible feeling, especially at a place like West Ham that was extremely boisterous. Didn't enjoy warming up for 65 minutes, I can assure you. But yeah, something that I will treasure for the rest of my life. And of all the shirts that I've still got, that black shirt, which was one of my favourites anyway, but it happened to be the one that I made my debut in, and my black shirt I've still got, actually in a drawer just underneath here.
And I think that first game, was it 2-2? Paul Ince scored to level it.
That's correct. Yeah, I was on the field. I had nothing to do with the goal, by the way, but I was on the field when Ince scored with only a couple of minutes to go, I think. And there was a great feeling, because West Ham was always a difficult place to go. I think if you remember, I don't know if it was a year later, or in fact it was a year later, when Blackburn won the title and we had to go to West Ham. And we had so many chances, and if we'd have just managed to pick one of them, then Blackburn would never have had the name on the trophy, because they lost to Liverpool, and we would have won it. So West Ham is always a very, very difficult place to go.
Definitely true, especially as you touched on the hostile environment that Upton Park.
Oh, it was. In fact, I don't know. Well, I mean, obviously they've got the reasons for moving to the Olympic Stadium, but as impressive a stadium as it is, it's nothing like the atmosphere generated at the bowling ground, Upton Park, whatever you want to call it. It really was hostile and a very, very difficult place to win.
But looking at the side that you were coming into there, there's some real experienced superstars. So you were well looked after. I'm just looking down the list. Peter Schmeichel, Steve Bruce, Pallister, Ince, obviously Roy Keane. You know, if you're going into battle, I'd certainly take these guys with me. And the one that really stands out is actually Cantona. What was it like working with Eric Cantona?
He was a really lovely guy. He was very, very quiet. But one of the things that Sir Alex wanted to do with us as a group when we were coming through was just to make sure that we observed Eric and the way that he trained and the way that he prepared himself for matches. He was a talisman, there's no question about it, but he was a very, very approachable guy who was, you know, as many conversations as I did have with him, and it wasn't many. He was a real charming bloke, but obviously a very, very talented footballer who probably, for reasons that he'd have to explain to you, retired way too soon. But I was lucky enough to play in the game where, and they still play the clip now, where he played the 1-2 with Brian McClare, and he just chipped it off the underside of the bar against Sunderland, and we won that game 5-0. And I thought that was my chance, because I thought he was going to hit the bar, and if you play the clip long enough, I'm steaming in from the left-hand side thinking, I'm going to get a tap in here. But such was his precision and his brilliance that I had no need to even make the run, because he scored a wonderful goal. And he was a real character for the likes of us to all be looking up to.
And of course, you were starting to get more appearances off the bench now. And were you starting to feel a bit more part of the side, and you were thinking that this was the start of something great?
Well, I would have done, but I didn't. That was the only appearance I made before I did my knee injury. The next time I was called upon was when Sir Alex said that Ryan was struggling for the FA Cup semi-final against Oldham, which would have been sort of the early to mid-April. And I was going to be playing in that game. So I went out and played a reserve game on the Wednesday before. And that's when the tackle happened. So I didn't actually make another first team appearance again until the 95-96 season.
And would you mind talking us through that? I mean, I think you were playing a reserve team game at the time, and it was against Blackburn. And I think I'm right in saying you've received the ball. And would it be fair to say it was a pretty full-blooded tackle for a reserve team fixture, where ultimately there wasn't a lot on the game?
No, there wasn't. I think it was just a case of a seasoned professional and an experienced professional sick of having the mickey taken out of him, I suppose. I tend not to try and sort of think too much about it, even though I've abolished it from my memory. But yeah, it was a reserve game where I'd scored a couple of goals and I was having a particularly good game. And he saw an opportunity to follow me into the centre of the field and give me a reducer, which obviously turned out to be a career-threatening injury at that time. But it certainly curtailed anything that I was ever going to do at Old Trafford, which is a shame. But that is just what football is. Unfortunately, it's a contact sport, and every now and again you open yourself up to a serious injury, and that on that occasion it happened to me, and certainly an injury like that can never happen at the right time, but that certainly did come at the wrong time for me, just as I'd made my debut, and just as I was about to perhaps don the Wembley turf and playing an FA Cup semi-final, which again would have been a huge dream.
Yeah, of course, that was the next game that you were marked to play in. I think you were back up for Giggs, was the plan for the semi.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think the manager was actually going to risk him for the semi-final. Unless I'd have played and scored a hat-trick, I don't think I would have kept my place for the final. I'm sure, but it still would have been an amazing feeling to play with those players at such a hallowed stadium. So that was taken away from me, but I would have sacrificed that for a pulled hamstring or some even some damaged ankle ligaments. But for the damage that was inflicted, it didn't just stop me from playing there. It stopped me from having a career at Manchester United.
And have you ever received an official apology from Nicky Marker, or
No.
He never said anything?
No.
And of course, I think Alex Ferguson was very supportive in pursuing it as a legal case. How does this process work? How do you go about, I'm presuming, suing a club and a player for such a serious injury?
Yeah, we were just trialling at that time. I think because it was before MUTV had been introduced, so they were actually trialling videoing reserve team games. And fortunately, they were there that night, so they had video. Without video evidence, it would have been nigh on impossible. Excuse me. So the manager was there, as were my parents, and straight away he grabbed my dad when he realised that that it was quite serious, and obviously after the operation had and what have you, the manager got my mum and dad into the club and said to them that under no uncertain terms does he want people to get away with things like that, because we didn't know well, we knew the extent of the injury, but obviously we didn't know what was going to happen after that, how I was going to recover from it, for example. And he was adamant that there should be some sort of compensation, and that if it helped outlaw tackles like the one he'd seen on me, then it could only be for the good of the game. So he took it to the High Court and he sued Blackburn Rovers, and that was a case for the insurers at Manchester United and their legal team, and Blackburn similarly. And the process went on for a long, long time. I'd left the club and had joined Huddersfield Town by the time that had come to the fore, and that was 5 years later in 1999.
And I presume you were successful in your case.
Yes, I was. I'd been sort of fairly drained of it, actually, because it's such a it's such a lengthy process, and it's such a time-consuming process as well. And every time I spoke about it, it helped to sort of drag up the memories of it. So when the opportunity was given for there to be a sort of arbitrary process without taking it even further and going into the courts, then we settled out of court and at a figure that I was happy with, and that both sides were happy with. So it was drawn to a close there.
How do you go about valuing a footballer, and certainly someone of your ability that was rubbing shoulders with the likes of Beckham and Giggs? How do they even begin putting a valuation on what your career would have been worth?
I'm obviously not sure. I really don't know. It was something that at the time I felt was a figure that I could take forward with me in my personal life, and that I would be able to invest it, and that I would be able to carry on playing football, because obviously at that time I joined another club and things were going well. So it wasn't something that I wanted to dwell on, and I didn't want to be somebody that was seen as a mercenary. I didn't know what sort of figures I might have been able to earn in my career, but I've never been brought up as a greedy person. And as much as some people might have said, you need to go for everything that you could possibly get, I just wanted to put the whole experience behind me, carry on with what I was doing, and not let that detract from that.
Hope you pulled the Nobby Styles quote out, though. That must have added a bit of value.
Yeah, well, I that Nobby Styles quote didn't come out until I was doing my book, but if that had come out at that time, then maybe I might have hung on a little bit longer.
I've got to ask a question, though, because Ferguson, fair play to him. I think in the modern game, a lot of managers might have released you. Well, Ferguson persevered. So he saw something in you. And I was actually reading an article where somebody compared your situation to that of Ruud van Nistelrooy. Because if you remember, he signed Ruud van Nistelrooy and he was out for almost a year with his knees. But he took that risk and he gambled because he saw so much in Ruud. And am I correct in saying Ferguson saw so much ability in you that he was hopeful that you could shake off this horrific injury?
I think he did, but I'm not going to say that it was the same thing as Ruud van Nistelrooy, because obviously Ruud went on to, he was already having a really good career, but he had a fabulous career, and his recovery from the injury that he had was obviously, went swimmingly. Whereas I had so much damage in my knee that I don't think I was ever going to be in a position where I was going to get back to the player that I was before. I think Ruud did that and more, and that's full credit to him. And I've never actually compared what injuries we had with our knees. I know we both did our cruciates, but I think Ruud's was solely his cruciate, whereas I'd done my medial, I'd torn my hamstring, I'd had ligament damage. So the damage to my knee was, at the time, looking irreparable. I think with the advance of science, when you think about when Alan Shearer did his and Niall Quinn did his and Gazza did his in the early 90s, I think when Ruud did his, there was much more technology available for these injuries to be healed quite quickly. I didn't have that. But listen, I'm taking nothing away from the career that Ruud had, and whether Sir Alex viewed it in a similar mould, I would only say to an extent. I don't think that he ever believed, having seen me play post injury, that I was ever going to make a regular first team player. But I think for Sir Alex it was more like affection. Because he was there when I did my knee, and he really felt that for a young lad to potentially have a real shot at playing for Manchester United, to have that cruelly taken away from him, I think that there was a certain amount of affection there as well, and sentiment rather than actual, footballing ability.
But fair play, you took it on the chin, and you alluded to it before. In '98, you made the move to Huddersfield. How was that?
I'd already been on loan there 2 years prior.
96.
96 under Brian Horton, who would obviously manage Manchester City, who I got along with really well. But I think I'd made an impact on the fans there. And when there was talk of me leaving Manchester United, I think there was a little bit of a noise coming out of Huddersfield that if I was available to, for the present managers, Peter Jackson and Terry Yorath, the ex Leeds and Wales international, to sign me, and that's how that came about. That was a no-brainer for me. I really enjoyed my spell there. It got me into the England under-21 setup at the end of that particular season. So I had a huge affection for the club and the fans, and when they came in for me to buy me on a permanent basis, I was more than happy to leave Manchester United at that time to go and play. Obviously, nobody's ever going to be happy to leave Man United, but I knew, and Sir Alex knew, that we'd reached a crossroads and I needed to further my career. And the other way I was going to do that was by going in search of first-team football, and that's how that came about.
And it was extremely successful, I'm correct in saying, the first half of that season, because I think you were top of the league at one point, but then you started falling away. And then one of your ex-colleagues, Stevie Bruce, came in. Yeah,
Steve Bruce came in at the end of that season to start the 99-2000 season. And again, we'd had a really good season. We were looking as though at one stage, like in the first season, we would be certainly with a chance of being in the playoffs. And again, we fell away. And when we came back for Steve Bruce's second season, we only won one game out of our first 10 games. And he was unfortunately given the sack.
I've got to ask, what happened in that training session? Did he walk, from what I've read, did he walk in, throw his boots on the floor and say, "See you later, lads"?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
He came over. He came over to the training ground, and he was late arriving because obviously he'd had the meeting with the board, and he came over just to say that he wouldn't be taking the session and wouldn't be taking any others because they parted company. So that was a sad day because me and Steve Bruce had our sort of ups and downs and not seen eye to eye from time to time. I'd come into the team and done really, really well for him, and at other stages I've not been in the team. And he, quite rightly as a manager, he wanted to pick his best 11, and at times I wasn't involved in that. So, and of course there were times when I felt as though I should have been given another opportunity and I wasn't. But that's what happens between, players and managers. Players just want to play. And sometimes when things are not going well on the pitch and you're on the sideline and you still feel like you're not getting a fair crack of the whip, then you want to try and voice your opinion and ask why. I won't be the first player to do that, and I certainly won't be the last. But I felt as somebody that had come up through the ranks at Manchester United, it was a very sad day. Nobody wants to see anybody losing the job. And of course, when a team isn't playing well, it's the manager that is the fall guy. And as he walked off and said his thank yous and his goodbyes, I personally sort of trotted across after him and just said exactly what I just said to you. I know we didn't always see eye to eye, and I'm really sorry about what's happened. But I just want to thank you for everything that you've done while you've been at the club and for me personally. And that was how we left it.
Really interesting you say that, because I've actually got that written down to bring up, because the article I read specifically quotes you as being the one who went over and thanked him of a very few players. So it's great to see that in the game, because as you say, he was a teammate. You then leave Huddersfield in 2001. Am I correct in saying that was more of a financial decision for Huddersfield as opposed to anything else?
It was, because they fell through the trapdoor in my last season, and then obviously they had players when the new owner came in and brought in Steve Bruce at the end of the 98-99 season. They brought in players that were on big money at the time, and of course dropping through the divisions when you're still with players under contracts with that are earning sort of 250, 300 grand a year, and we're talking back in in the what is now the first division, and we're talking 20 odd years ago. That was a lot of money, and these players obviously took them down again, and they found themselves in the last tier of English football another season after I'd left. So they had no money to offer players new contracts, and I was out of contract, so I was one of the first to be told you know, thanks very much, but after 3 years, we haven't got the money to be able to offer you a new contract. Or they did, but it would have been on half as much, if not more, than I was already earning. So I left Huddersfield, and I was in a little bit of limbo. And then out of the blue, in that summer, I got a phone call from Aberdeen to say, we want you to come up and have a couple of days training and maybe play 1 or 2 trial matches. So I duly did that. They had already started their season by 1 game. I played a game on the Tuesday after that at Arbroath. I'd scored 2 goals. I won as a penalty in the game. And on the strength of that, they didn't want me to play any more trial matches. They were happy to offer me a 2-year deal. And so I signed it straight away.
Without intruding too much, am I correct in saying that your time in Aberdeen was both positive and negative? Positive in terms of you playing football, you're enjoying your football, but negative in terms of your personal life, and maybe some of the vices from earlier on in your career started taking over a little bit?
Yeah, that is absolutely true. I did go up there and I was straight in the team. I scored on my home debut, which was a real great feeling because I'd played 2 games prior to that in Edinburgh against Hearts and Hibs, and we'd lost both games. So this was the first chance of the Aberdeen fans to have a glimpse of me. And trust me, they hadn't seen much up until that point. But we played Motherwell and we beat them 4-2. And I scored a really good goal from the edge of the area, volley cleared from a corner, and I just volleyed it straight back in. And we won the game 4-2. And from then on in, certainly the first half of that season was brilliant. And in fact, the whole season was really, really good. But I fell into the syndrome of being a lad in his mid-20s in a place that is very, very easy to go out and have a few drinks, and you meet up with either other players or you meet up with the lads that you sort of get to know from being around the town. And I spent way too much time being out on the town, having a good time, rather than concentrating on what I was supposed to be doing, which was having a footballing career. And so I did, and that ultimately affected me. It affected my performances, it affected my training, and for a short while it sort of took over, and not something that I'm proud of at all. And if there were, there are many things in my life that I could go back and change, that would have been one of them, because I did see playing in Aberdeen as an opportunity for maybe me to get another move back down to England. Maybe obviously not to the Premier League, but certainly to what we now call the Championship. I really did feel as though I was just coming into my prime, and there was a chance for me to do that. And unfortunately, I blew that.
Thank you for being so honest with us. I've asked this question to a couple of other candidates and other guests that we've had on before. Do you think that the psychological impact of the injury and a lack of support that there was maybe in the late 90s and early 2000s, do you think there was a lack of support for players who maybe needed it? Yeah,
there is, or there was, I should say. There isn't anymore. I think that the mental and the psychological side of the game has improved dramatically, and I don't think just in football. I think in all areas of sport and in life in general, that there are lots and lots of different organisations now where you can go and you can speak to people about problems that you will be having psychologically. And obviously, if you're sound of mind upstairs, then whatever you're doing in your everyday life, you're going to feel more comfortable doing. And I do think that maybe there was a little bit of the subconscious of me of saying to myself that, I don't want to use the term feeling sorry for myself, because that has me painting a picture of me, sort of sitting around being really, really depressed, when that probably actually would have been better, would have been slightly better for me than the alternative, which is what I did, going out and enjoying myself all the time. And I think that is how I dealt with it. And certainly now there are plenty of other ways in which you can quite confidentially go and speak to people about any problems that you might be having in both your work life and your personal life. And I commend that, because we see and we hear far too often of people, even at the top level of sport. You think of somebody like Gary Speed, for example, you know, people who've had an absolutely brilliant career, and it just beggars the question, why would somebody do that? And how is it that couldn't have been recognised, and why he didn't get the help that he perhaps needed? And I'm only using him as a high profile example, but there are many, many more in all walks of life where you think, you know, was the right help available, and why didn't that particular individual speak up and say, you know, I'm struggling? But I think you are starting to see that more and more because of the help that's available.
Fair play to you. Thank you again for being so open and honest. And you, for want of a better phrase, you took the bull by the horns, and you did make the move back. You came back down to Blackpool. I think it was Stevie Mack signed you at Blackpool.
That's right. Yeah, I was really excited about the five. Fallen out of favour completely with the manager at Aberdeen. He wasn't even including me in match day squads or anything like that. And I knew that I needed to get myself back into a routine where there was a chance, or a very good chance, that after I'd done a week's training, I was going to be playing. I was basically just, you know, training, and I was getting nothing at the end of it. And that wasn't what I'd signed up for. So, having said that, I would have stayed at Aberdeen if I'd have known when I signed for Blackpool that the manager was also going to leave. That would have been a big thing for me, because everybody would have had a clean slate. And indeed, the managers that came in at Aberdeen were quite sort of disappointed that I'd already signed a contract for January the 1st with Blackpool. But that was done and dusted. It couldn't have been undone. And it gave me a chance to move back down to England and to be back closer to home again. And I was really looking forward to working with somebody that obviously was a fantastic player in Steve McMahon. But sadly, it didn't turn out like that with his managerial skills. The club was really badly run. We didn't train as often as I would have liked. He very often disappeared to his place in Spain, and we wouldn't see him from a Saturday at 5:30 until the following Thursday or Friday. And I just felt as though the club didn't really have any direction, and that showed with the lads were cracking lads, don't get me wrong, but we hadn't trained enough. For me, we weren't fit enough. And I only played 6 months at Blackpool, and I decided that even with the offer of staying for another year, that I would move and go elsewhere, because I was slowly but surely starting to fall out of love with the game of professional football after that experience.
I mean, that was the time, if I'm not mistaken, was the Oystons at that time as well?
That's right. It was actually Carl, because Owen Oyston had obviously, shall we say, had his problems away from football. So it was still being run through his son, but there was no communication. It was really, really poorly run, and I just didn't enjoy my time there at all apart from actually the banter in the dressing room with what was a really good set of lads.
Yeah, I remember that, because I think, I'm sorry to labour the point, but I remember, was it Oyston on the television that just come out of prison, and he was asked to open the stand in what I can only describe as a surreal moment in football.
Most probably.
Yeah, it's strange times at Blackpool.
And then the next stage, Ben, in your career took you to Salford City, but Salford before what we know it is now. What was your experience of Salford City at the time, returning home, local club, but much further down the leagues? Yeah, well,
I'd played, prior to that, I'd played for Baycup Borough. Then I moved from there to go to Salford, because there were lads there that I knew. It was closer to my home. I really liked the manager who was there. He was a Salford guy himself. And yeah, like you said, I mean, if you went to Salford City today, it just looks completely different compared to what it was years ago when I was there. It's a fantastic stadium to be at now. But I loved it. You know, we won a cup there. And I then got the opportunity to go and play for Witton Albion, and my brother was playing there. My brother was a very, very good non-league player. He scored a lot of goals for Altrincham, played in numerous different sides in non-league, but he most notably scored the goal at Stoke City that got Altrincham promoted for the first time in a long time into what we now know as the National League. Back then it was the Conference. So that was quite a proud moment for me because I watched that game and he scored the winning goal. So, but Altrincham couldn't afford to go full time. And of course, they only had one season and then they got relegated again. But he'd moved on to Witton Albion and I got the opportunity to go and join him there. So that was quite nice. I mean, we didn't play at the same level as, you know, sort of Sir Bobby and Jack Charlton and Gary and Phil Neville. But, it was still, you know, quite a proud moment for my parents to come and watch a game where both their sons are playing a competitive game of football. So, yeah, I didn't sort of spend a long time at any of the non-league clubs that I was at. And Bury as well, that I played for a short spell when my old teammate Chris Casper was put in charge after he was promoted from the youth team when Andy Priest, the manager, was given the sack. So I started to enjoy it a little bit again. I didn't have the added thing that I had to be in training every day. You still got the banter when you got into the dressing room when you were doing the training. It just didn't happen quite as often. So yeah, that was the last sort of real competitive game of football I played, was when I played with my brother. And all the football that I get now is organising ex-players matches and going playing against for Man United teams and against Liverpool in the Far East, which obviously we've not been able to do this year because of this terrible pandemic we've all been enduring.
And am I correct in saying that you then changed careers completely, or you had 2 or 3 different careers?
Oh, mate, I have done everything.
Are you the Swiss Army knife?
Yeah, honestly. I've driven taxis, I've managed restaurants, I've worked with my brother-in-law who had a contract doing all the River Island stores. I have turned my hand to absolutely everything, and I always with an eye on wanting to get back into football, not in the coaching side of it, but even though I did do a couple of my coaching badges, but it was the media where I really wanted to get myself involved, and I still did games for MUTV on match days, even though I wasn't particularly part of the club at that time. But then I got a call in 2013, the night that Nani was sent off for United playing Real Madrid in the Champions League. I got a call a few days before that asking me to come back and would I like to have a role as not an ambassador as such, but doing the match day hospitality, going from exec box and all the rooms where people sit and you can chat to ex-players and I jumped at the chance and then my role with MUTV came a little bit more to the fore, where last year I was doing all the away games, and at this moment in time I'm doing the commentary for all the home and away games. So next season is a new season. They might have a new role for me, but I hope to be able to continue doing exactly what I'm doing now because I absolutely love it and I love the club.
Fair play. And now I'm going to give you the opportunity for a plug, because in November 18 you also released your book with was it co-written with Dan Poole? That's
right, yeah. Dan, a lovely fella, contacted me after he'd seen me travelling through Euston Station. He just worked round the corner, big United fan, and actually probably started following the club when we all joined in 91, 92. So he had loads of different things that he would love to have gotten signed, and he took the opportunity, having seen me going through Euston Station on numerous occasions, of getting in touch and saying, listen, would you mind if you signed a few things for me? I've been a big United fan for years. So, me being who I am and thinking that this isn't anybody that's going to leave me on the A40 with a pitchfork in my back, I just said, yeah, absolutely. And he contacted me about 2 days later and said, your career is albeit you've never done it at the top level, I think that people would be interested to hear your story. And, I still ummed and ahed and thinking, I was a footballer at Man United that didn't make it, and, would anybody be really that interested? But when he told me of how he was going to construct the book, then I spoke to my partner, I spoke to my mum and dad, and they just said, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And, at the very least, you can say that you've written or co-written a book. And that's how it came about. And I've got nothing but the utmost of thanks and gratitude for all the people that took part and gave up their time to speak about me and tell the reader what they actually thought about me and what they thought that I perhaps could have gone on to achieve, what they thought was the difference in me between pre and post injury. And obviously there's a few sad moments in there, there's a few laughs in there, but I had a really, really good time over the year that I spent doing it with Dan, who's a fantastic guy. And the book has been really well received. I didn't do it for the money in the slightest. I did it because I thought it would be a cathartic exercise, and it turned out to be just that, and I was absolutely thrilled with the finished article.
I've just got to pick up on something you said there. You said you didn't make it at the top level. I'm going to refer for the third time in this interview. When Matt Busby and Nobby Stiles are saying you're the best up-and-coming youngster at the club and you're being compared to George Best, don't ever do yourself an injustice.
I suppose I can't just go off one comment, as credible as it may be, because you know the lads that I grew up with. When you think of Gary and Nicky and Scholesy and obviously David, with what he went on to achieve with so many different clubs, these lads were fabulous lads to grow up with. They were always going to be top players. And I didn't have their career, and there's no debate in that. Whether I would without the injury is still up for debate, but I certainly would have been given the opportunity. But take nothing away from every single one of those lads. I went to the new camp in '99. I was lucky enough to fly over with the aforementioned Maltese Supporters Club, which was the craziest 2 flights I've ever been on, I can assure you. And I was the first to congratulate these lads because I was so proud of what they've achieved, and there was no remorse, no jealousy, no envy. Well, all right, there was a bit of envy because I'd love it to have been me, but there was certainly no jealousy, and I couldn't have been happier for them with what they achieved that season. It was just brilliant, and will probably never ever be surpassed.
So what is next for you now? What's
next for me? I will be at Crystal Palace tomorrow night. I will be doing the co-commentary for our game, and having seen Wolves concede a 95th minute penalty this evening, we've got a great opportunity to put more pressure on Chelsea and on Leicester, and obviously a little bit of the cushion underneath between us and Wolves, which, with only 2 games to go after tomorrow, is really, really big. And then I'll be at Wembley on Sunday for the semi-final against Chelsea, which is going to be another thrilling occasion. And just hopefully finish off the season. However the Europa League turns out, we're still in with a shout of finishing in the top 3 or 4. We're still in 2 competitions, and we will very soon have next season to look forward to with what Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is building is a very, very exciting team. So that is me until hopefully the distant future.
That sounds a lot more appealing than my week. I've got the in-laws visiting. Ben, thank you so much for joining us on the Soccer Sofa. We truly appreciate your time. It's been an incredible interview, and thank you for being so open and honest with us.
Absolutely not a problem, guys. It's been a pleasure. I hope everything goes well for you.